Okay. Murder on the banks of Lytle Creek. Captain Conklin, whose family lived on the banks of Lytle Creek, was murdered by his wife. His children held him down, allowing his wife to slit his throat. Captain Conklin is buried in State Cemetery. State Cemetery is also the burial site for many infants and children. So I kind of came across this when I'm looking at different patterns in cemeteries, and especially for families that have lost a lot of children, trying to figure out, what happened, if there was some kind of, disease or something at the time. And then I came across the murder as well, but I do want to touch on State Cemetery as well, which is where he is buried. State Cemetery is located in Jackson County, Fulton, Iowa. The 44 burials are mostly members of the Edwards, Fugate, Sade, Streets, and Webb families. Almost half of all the burials in State Cemetery are children. Farther away?
It
like
echoes.
This? Okay. Is this better?
There's just distortion, right? When you have it too close. Something new.
Many Edwards children are buried in State Cemetery. The 5 Edwards children buried there include Calvin, age 10, who was the son of, I wonder if I have a typo here, but I've got Ariel Edwards and Caroline Catherine Streets Edwards. Catherine, age 2, was the daughter of David and Mary Jane Schrank Edwards. Willard, age 1 month, and Richard, age 7, were the sons of Ezra and Mary Streets Edwards. Sanford, age 2, parents are unknown. Also, Charity Heath, age 4, died in 1876. Her stone was erected by her grandmother Edwards. 4 children of Josiah Fugate are buried in State Cemetery. Arthur died at 9 months of age, Manville 10 months, and Richard was just 1 month old. Daughter Indiana died at age 18. Josiah Fugate was a Civil War veteran, having served with the 4th Iowa Cavalry, Company G. He and his wife, Sarah Coffey, were the parents of 12 children. Sarah was one of Iowa's first pioneers, having arrived in 1837, where she remained a resident until her death 77 years later. Josiah and Sarah are buried in Hickory Grove Cemetery, which is located in Emmeline. State children buried in the State Cemetery include the children of N.J. and S.P. Sade, Leffie, age 1, and Miles was 3. The children of Jesse and Indiana Fugate Sade, Jane, 16, and Josiah, 1. I'm not sure the relationship between this Indiana Fugate Sade and the Indiana Fugate that died at age 18. And then the child of unknown parents, Sari Sade, age 2. And the daughter of N and C Sade, Susanna, died at age 1. 7 Webb children are buried in the State Cemetery. The children of John and Mary A. Beard Webb. Ezra, 7, Jay, 9, John, 12. 14 were born to them. Mary outlived most of her children. The children of unknown Webb parents were Manville, 2, Samantha, 7, Thomas, 3, and William, 18. And so perhaps those go with, the 7 children of John and Mary. Okay, this quote is from the Ellis History of Jackson County, the Conklin family. And I have to say, kind of the way this was written up, sometimes I wonder if people should write things like that when they're describing someone's family, just the words that they use and everything. But anyway, this is a quote from the Ellis History. In 1850, there was, living on the banks and near the mouth of Lytle Creek in Farmers Township, a family by the name of Conklin, consisting of William Conklin, his wife, and a large family of children, several of them grown up. Conklin was a rough man and had a reputation as being a hard drinker. Mrs. Conklin was a large, muscular woman of the Amazonian type. It's just like, really? You're going to put that in the history book? We have a picture. And the progeny of the couple, with 2 exceptions, were a hard lot. On or about the first day of October 1856, the neighborhood was thrown into consternation and excitement by the report that Conklin had been murdered by his wife, assisted by sons Aminadab and Elijah. The accused parties were arrested and indicted by the grand jury for the crime of murder. July 11, 1857, the case of the Conklins came on for hearing at the July term of district court. R.S. Hadley was appointed special prosecuting attorney, and W.E. Leffingwell defended the Conklins. With the acquittal of Esther Conklin, the indictments against Aminadab and Elijah were quashed. The witnesses, with one exception, were members of the Conklin family, or related to the Conklins, and their evidence made it appear that the old lady was acting in self-defense when she struck the fatal blow. It was claimed by the Conklins that the old man had attempted to assault the old lady with a butcher knife. But that she wrestled the knife from him and struck him in the neck, inflicting a mortal wound. Captain William James Conklin, Jr. was the son of William James Conklin, Sr. and Susanna Wood. He was born in 1808 in New York, and he died at the age of 48. At the time of his death, he was survived by his wife, daughters Phoebe, 26, Elizabeth Anna, 25, Mary, 24, Mahala, 21, Elizabeth, 16, Esther, 12, Julia, 3, and Nancy was born the same year her father died. Conklin was survived by sons Aminadab, 22, William, 19, Elijah and Isaiah, age 18, Moses, 14, John, 9, and Thomas, 7. So, just think to have this whole family, impacted by the events of that day. Captain Conklin married Esther Melinda, and her nickname was Easter Ackley, in 1828 in Monroe, Ohio. She was just 16. It has been suggested that Easter Ackley was Native American, possibly full-blooded. In 1956, her great-granddaughter Sylvia Lucinda Sade gave an account to relatives, including her grandson Freeman Walker, that Easter was an Indian and had told her such in about 1885 in Frontier County, Nebraska. However, current research, including numerous DNA matches, suggests that her parents, were someone else, were Philo Hackley and Elmira Griswold, who were not Native Americans. They moved to Jackson County between 1846 and 1848 and settled in Brandon Township. A Profitable Wife is a historical fiction written by a descendant of Esther Conklin. And if you're not familiar with what historical fiction is, usually, historical fiction has to do with, it's taken, it's written in the past, but then they do use some elements that are true as far as the setting for the story, and sometimes even the characters. And one of the reasons that they call it fiction, even if they use characters or real characters, is, no one could have known what they said. It wasn't as though any of this could be recorded. But in reading her story, it really puts this whole tragedy in a different light. So anyway, as I said, the historical fiction, the story takes place in the past. And the historical novels capture the details of the time period as accurately as possible for authenticity, including social norms, manners, customs, and traditions. And many novels in this genre tell fictional stories that involve actual historical figures or historical events. And so this is a little bit about the story here. Embark on a captivating journey with Kat Christensen's novel, a narrative that breathes life into the pages of American history. Set against the expansion of a nation from the aftermath of the War of 1812 to the era preceding the Civil War, this story ushers you into a world teeming with romance, jealousy, murder, and the unyielding spirit of survival. Meet Easter, a formidable young woman who carves her homestead from the 1830s American Northwest frontier. This vivid tale transports you back to a time where the foundation stones of the modern United States were laid. Witness iconic historical figures such as Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay Black Hawk, and many more through Easter's eyes. A testament to an era where politics, much like today, were intense and vehement. Okay, so now, as detailed by the author, in my historical novel, A Profitable Wife, I briefly touch on the often overlooked, yet profoundly impactful issue of prairie madness, a mental affliction that plagued many women pioneers of the Great Plains. Does anyone have any knowledge about this, prairie madness at all?
I've read about it, yeah.
Do you want to add anything about what you...
No, I know I collect diaries of pioneer women, and I know one I have is titled Nothing to Do But Stay. I mean, they got out there totally isolated, the wind all the time, and they're just totally alone, and
So just being so
flips them
alone
out.
like that
Yeah.
could really mess with your mental health for sure.
Yeah.
And then the foreword of this book. The first time I heard this infamous family lore, I was about 9 years old, perched on a footstool next to my grandmother's rocking chair. Her coy smile and hushed tone conveyed the secrecy of the tale. It was not shared until you were trusted not to broadcast it. A promise requested and given. My grandmother recited the brutal account, a brutal account which had been passed down by her own grandmother, who was the ancestor's daughter. As she finished the story, this fair-skinned, red-headed, elderly woman of Irish descent tantalized me with the revelation that this ancestor was of mixed Native American heritage. Although many ancestors are mere placeholders in our family tree, Easter Melinda Hackley has notoriously been remembered by many of her descendants, including my grandmother, having us all to wonder about the circumstances. And so there are still in this area a lot of descendants of this family. And another quote from the book. Easter, the pioneer. A scrappy young pioneer carves out her 1830s homestead on the early American Northwest frontier. As adventure sweeps Easter Hackley through the annals of American history, this trailblazer proves that she has every bit of the right stuff as her male counterparts. Nobody messes with Easter. And just a little side note here, her grandparents had participated in the Revolutionary War. And another quote, on October 1st, 1856, a harrowing incident occurred between Easter and her husband, forever altering the lives of their family. By then, Easter had 13 children and 13 grandchildren. Her 4 eldest daughters had families and farms of their own. And so that number contradicts a little bit what was in the Ellis history. 6 sons and 3 daughters remained in the household. Her final child, a daughter, was born the year William Conklin was killed, which earlier I mentioned that it was a son, so I mean I'm just not sure about that. Despite this tragedy, Easter lived on, outlasting 2 more husbands and witnessing her older sons return unscathed from the Civil War. Easter lived through the administration of 9 more presidents. From James Buchanan to Grover Cleveland, her children, Elijah, Anna, Mahala, and Julia Etta, each named a daughter in her honor. And Elijah even named one of his sons, Henry Clay Conklin, after the famed statesman. So, you know, for them to name, I mean, I think they really thought highly of their mother. So, not to judge her, you know, by what happened in the past. Easter eventually ventured out to California to visit Mahala, who was rumored to have exacted revenge on horse thieves by hunting them down, shooting them, and scalping them. And I've got more about that story later on. Mary outlived 7 of her 9 children and all of her siblings except for Elijah. Easter passed away on October 25, 1893, at the age of 81, having traversed her life under the governance, I already read that, didn't I? I had that in there twice, 19 presidents. Though her final resting place remains unknown, it is whispered that she might share a grave with one of her approximate 120 grandchildren. State of Iowa versus Esther Conklin, Aminadab Conklin, Elijah Conklin, indictment for murder. Presented by the foreman of the grand jury in presence of said grand jury in open court, and filed by me in open court in presence of said grand jury this 11th day of July, 1857, I am Breaky Clerk. Willfully and with malice aforethought did make an assault, and that the said Esther Conklin, with a certain knife of the value of 10 cents, which she, the said Esther Conklin, in her right hand then and there, and held the throat of him, the said William Conklin, feloniously, willfully, and of her malice aforethought, did strike, stab, and cut, and that the said Esther Conklin, with the knife aforesaid, and the striking, stabbing, and cutting aforesaid, did then and there give to him the said William Conklin, in and upon the throat of him, the said William Conklin, one mortal wound of the length of 2 inches, and the depth of 4 inches, of which said mortal would he, the said William Conklin, in the county aforesaid, instantly died. That Aminadab Conklin and Elijah Conklin, feloniously, willfully, and of their malice aforethought, were present, aiding and abetting the said Esther Conklin, the felony last aforesaid, to do and commit. Witnesses were Esther Conklin, William Conklin, Ira Edwards, Jesse Say, James Say, Ann Wallace. And as mentioned earlier, the witnesses, with the exception of one, were all members of the Conklin family, or related to the Conklins. And their evidence made it appear that it was self-defense. The verdict. We, the jurors, find the defendant not guilty, as charged in the indictment. July 11, 1857, the case of the Conklins came on for hearing at the July term of the district court. R.S. Hadley was appointed the special prosecuting attorney, and W.E. Leffingwell defended the Conklins. There was a local article, and it was titled Bygone Days, and I inadvertently missed what the date was on that. But with the acquittal of Esther Conklin, the indictments against Aminadab and Elijah Conklin were quashed. The old lady and some of the younger boys were residing in Farmers Creek Township until about 20 years ago, but they have never prospered. The stigma of the murder of the old man clung to them, and they were generally regarded with distrust. The boys were engaged in several escapades, which cost the county a good many dollars, and it was a good job for old Jackson when they shook her dust from their feet. William Conklin Jr. was well respected by his neighbors, as was Phoebe, who married Thomas Sade and lived on the old Conklin farm until recently. It was said that little Tom Conklin, who could not talk very plain at the time, was being questioned about the killing of his father. And he said, "Aminadab held Dad by a hair, while Ma cut his throat." Another quote from The Profitable Wife. In April of 1858, Esther's son-in-law, Thomas Sade, Phoebe's husband, filed a petition for the removal of Easter, as the guardian of her minor children. Outcome unknown. But I did notice in the 1860 census, it shows her living with the children and a new husband. Phoebe's husband, Thomas Sade, and William, Billy Conklin, were trying to manage the Conklin farms, fall harvest and crop sales. William couldn't access any funds because his mother was in charge. Someone had said she left the state with Ira Green, a longtime neighbor who had supported her through the previous year's turmoil. Billy's 5-year-old sister, Julia Etta, claimed that Ira was going to be their new father. Not only that, but Easter had told one of the neighbors that she was of native descent, sharing wild stories of roaming the woods as a child with her real mother, learning to hunt and gather. When she was exonerated of Mr. Conklin's murder, Easter had appointed to administer the estate with the bank lawyer overseeing her duties. Given her lack of transparency and the fact that she vanished entirely, Billy and Phoebe's husband joined forces to make Easter demonstrate why she shouldn't be discharged from these responsibilities. They had no idea how Easter was managing the money. A couple of days ago, to access monthly stipends from Mr. Conklin's estate, Phoebe and Tom Say filed for guardianship of the 4 youngest children. It seemed right for Phoebe's husband and Billy to be solely in charge of the farm, ensuring the family income didn't vanish. Annie, Billy's sister, who practically raised him, confronted Billy and Phoebe. How could you do that to Mom after all she's been through? Billy's wife, Mariah, said it wasn't Phoebe, it was her husband. Phoebe had taken in the younger Conklins. Billy said, what was I supposed to do? How am I supposed to run things without any money? Thomas Sage suggested he ask the lawyer for some money until his mother returned. Easter and William were the parents of at least 14 children. Some accounts show their firstborn was Isaiah. Isaiah was born in Ohio and died at age 60 in the Northern Cape, South Africa. And again, this was a family member that listed him, but makes me think maybe he doesn't fit in this family if he was in Africa. I don't know. Daughter Phoebe Conklin was born June 23rd, 1830 in Ohio. Phoebe, wife of Thomas Say, died at her home after a long illness. She married Thomas Jefferson Say in 1848 in Jackson County. She was the mother of 3 boys and 1 girl. And at the time of her death, there were 31 grandchildren and 21 great-grandchildren. She died at the age of 79 years and was ever trying in some way to make others happy. She was an Adventist Christian, believing in the second coming of Christ. Her daughter Mary was the wife of George Edwin Clark. They were the parents of 7 or more children. In 1899, at the age of 40, she had given birth to Verna, but there were complications and she died. So with the promise to the dying mother to raise her newborn sister, Lydia Clark Edwards, age 25, was handed Verna Lucretia. And the 1900 census shows that this family, Phoebe and Thomas Say, they were living in Oklahoma, so they must have been homesteading. Elizabeth Conklin was born in Ohio. She married twice. First to Thomas Claudius Wallace of County Cork, Ireland, in 1850 at St. Patrick's Church in Garryowen. Second to George Wilson in 1891. She and her husband had 13 children. She died at the age of 85 and is buried next to her husband and sons in St. Aloysius Cemetery, South Garryowen. She was survived by 6 sons and 2 daughters. Elizabeth Conklin Wallace's son, which was Easter's grandson, was named James Michael Wallace. Pictured here is James in 1891. He had the first bicycle in Jackson County. And according to historical data, Wallace rode the bike to New York City, boarded a ship to Ireland, and then used the bike to tour Ireland. It was there that he met Ellen Dennehy and was married. Later, he was a U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma during the opening of the Cherokee Strip. He lived nearly 18 months in the Cherokee Strip without a roof over his head. That one time he cooked a meal at noon on a clear day and he counted 24 wolves circling his camp. He reportedly rode that same bike 1,600 miles in 16 days. When he was a boy, his parents took him by lumber wagon from South Garryowen to Dubuque, where he danced against and defeated the dancing champion of Iowa, whose name was Brunel Coffey, and the competition was limited to clogs and reels. Esther's third-born daughter, Mary Conklin, had 4 husbands. She married her first husband, Abram Bartholomew, in 1850. He remarried in 1856. He had served with the 33rd Wisconsin Infantry and was killed in Tennessee, and he's buried at the Memphis National Cemetery. Mary next married Bartlett Emerson Sr. in 1853, and they had 4 children together, and they also divorced. She married her third husband, Thomas Bourne, in 1865, and they had 2 children. Thomas, her third husband, died in Sacramento, California. And then Mary remarried again to John Francis Wall, and they had 4 children. Mary had several children who had died young. Easter's son, Milladad Conklin, lived to be 83 years old. He is buried in Oklahoma. Shown with his wife, Margaretta Edwards. She was a cousin to his brother William's wife, Mariah. And they were the parents of 4 or more children. Aminadab and his sister Mary were both, it says, I've seen different accounts on this, they were both born in 1833, but they weren't twins. One was born in March, and one was born in April. So, I don't think that's possible. Something's not right there. Easter's daughter, Mahala, married Benjamin Emerson Shumway in 1853. He was one of the founders of Shakopee, Minnesota. They were the parents of 3 daughters and 1 son. The Shumways are buried in Oregon. Mahala and Benjamin Shumway shown in photo. And by the looks of that house, I mean, it looks like they did well. Here's the article. I told you we were going to get back to this about the scalping. And it's titled, Davy Tells, My Own Story by John L. Davy. And I don't know, where this was published, what paper this was published in, but mother, 4 children, trail Indians to camp after theft. Slay 6 in Sierra gunfight. The Shumways family, father, mother, 2 sons, and 2 daughters, lived on an isolated ranch. The father with his eldest son was away from the ranch for several days, engaged in bringing their herd down from the higher ranges. As it is still custom with ranchers, the majority of the saddle stock is kept in a corral some distance from the house. And the horses that they actually are in use, they're quartered nearby for convenience. So learning that the men of the house were away, a band of Paiutes stole down to the ranch one night and made away with all of the horses, except for the ones that were close to the house. So silently did they work that neither Mahala Shumway, which is Easter's daughter, nor any of her other children discovered the theft until daybreak. Incensed at the loss of the fine lot of horses, the mother of the family directed her daughters to prepare a stock of provisions while she and the young son saddled the remaining horses and secured rifles and ammunition. They all set out, the expedition headed by the dauntless pioneer mother. As she had lived most of her life in the wilderness, the woman had no trouble following the trail of the thieving Indians and their loot. What courage! 3 women and a young boy, dodging the trail of a band of savages intent on bringing them to justice and recovering their property. They traveled rapidly all day. At night they pitched camp, arising at daybreak to resume the hunt. All day they followed the tracks as dusk approached. They saw the smoke of the campfire. The mother ordered the horses tethered. With the caution and the silence of the redskins themselves, the Shumways crept toward the camp of the Indian thieves. Keeping to the cover, they spied the savages and recognized the horses as their own. There were perhaps a half dozen of the Indians. The Shumways crept to within rifle range of the thieves and hid behind the rocks. The mother, as leader of the little band, whispered to her children to wait until all the Indians were in view before firing. Then, at the signal from her, 4 rifles spoke. 4 Indians dropped. The 2 remaining savages reached for their rifles. Before they could return fire, the Shumways fired again. The two Indians fell. The one-sided battle was over. The superiority of the whites was vindicated, and mountain justice had been done. 2 days later, the little party arrived back home with all their stock. But that was not all. They brought with them 6 redskin scalps, which they set out on the fence as a warning to would-be thieves. That was the spirit that built the West. In the face of hardship and privation against nature-placed and man-made obstacles, the spirit that won through and made it possible for the modern generation to lead easier lives. The son later came to Oklahoma and became a key system employee. At the time of Mahala's death, having survived Benjamin by about 7 weeks, their assets were substantial and consisted of the following: 2,613 acres of land in Lassen County, California, valued at approximately $10,000. And then they had some judgments against some people, the sum of $828, plus they owned 2 city lots in Oakland, California. And it says here, 1090 Elaine Street. Oh, that's probably address, probably isn't there anymore, but, and that was valued at $5,000. More about the Shumways. Oregon City Courier, Friday, February 19, 1909. Benjamin Emerson Shumway quietly passed at 6:30 at his home on the Norton Donation Claim, Clackamas County, Oregon, at the age of 85 years. He was born in Maine, and he resided in the state of Maine until he was 25 years old, following the lumber business. And in 1848, he went to Minnesota, locating land on the Falls of St. Anthony, on the present site of Minneapolis. Was one of the founders of the town of Shakopee, Minnesota. And in 1859, he crossed the plains with an ox team, wintering the first winter in Honey Lake, California. He engaged in prospecting and mining in California and Nevada for about 10 years. And in 1869, he located land in Horse Lake Valley, which was located in California. And he conducted a stock ranch there for about 20 years. And when he sold out stock and ranch, he moved to Oregon, and that's where he resided until his death. Said he was very well respected by all who came in contact with him. And so the picture on the left, that does show Honey Lake Valley. And then the right is more like present day, I guess. Easter's son, William James Conklin IV, married Mariah Catherine Edwards in 1857. They were the parents of at least 16 children. Mariah, who died in 1930, is buried in North Dakota. Her husband, who preceded her death, get this, he's buried in South Dakota. So, story on that. The census showed that in 1880, though, this family, they were living in Farmers Creek. Shown in photo is the William and Mariah Conklin family. Reuben, Mike, William, Frank, Fritz, Louis, Tom, Peter, Ida, Maria, Mariah, and Mary. Easter's son, Elijah Friendly Conklin, was born in 1839, and this obituary, Lincoln, Nebraska. Friendly Elijah Conklin dies at the age of 103. Forgot 5 years of his life. Elijah Conklin, the man who lived so long that he forgot 5 years of his life, died at his home at the age of 103. Mr. Conklin, who spent the last few years of his life in quiet repose at his home, chose to style himself Friendly Elijah, and he was a Civil War veteran. In 1928, he found himself in the midst of a happy celebration of his 94th birthday, when relatives who claimed to have investigated records of the U.S. Pension Bureau stepped in and told him he really was 99. He had 8 children. So he survived, or I told you that he was a Civil War veteran, and he'd survived wounds sustained in the battle at Lookout Mountain. He had 8 children and 111 grandchildren, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, and all of his children survived him. And then later in life, he wasn't able to read, and that
so he depended on his relatives to read to him after his wife had died. Easter's daughter, Elizabeth Eliza Conklin, was reported by the author as being the only one of her children who did not make it to adulthood. Easter's son, Reuben Moses, also known as Moses Reuben Conklin, was first married to Mary Heath in 1866, and they had at least 9 children. He later married Mary Antonia Dado, and he served in the Battle of Shiloh with the 8th Iowa Company I, and he suffered with illness for the rest of his life. Reuben is buried in California. Easter's daughter, Esther, married James Flanagan in Rock Island, Illinois in 1861. She lived to be 64, and she's also buried in California. Easter's son, John Bunyan Conklin, was 77 years old when he passed away in San Francisco. He enlisted in the Army at age 24 and served with the Ohio Cavalry, Company I. He first married Melvina Stadler, who died in 1864, and then he married Frances Marion Westmatch in Washington, D.C. They had 5 children. John Conklin was a carriage maker. Easter's son, Thomas Diademus Conklin, married Melvina Dalrymple in 1875, and they were the parents of 1 daughter and 3 sons. Thomas had worked at the Navy Yard as a ship joiner for a number of years. He and his wife are buried in California. The 1870 census shows they were living in Custer, Nebraska. And then by the next census, they were living in Oregon. So I don't know if these were all homesteading places, but they moved around a lot. Easter's daughter, Julia, shown in the far left picture, is on the right, sitting down with the hat. And she was the wife of George Stadler. They were the parents of 12 children. The Stadlers, who married in 1870, are buried in Nebraska. And so, I don't know how well you can see her husband's face there, but would you like to know what he was thinking? When that photo was taken, it's not very flattering. A 4th great-granddaughter provided the names of Nancy and her younger brother Lemuel as being children of Easter. However, Lemuel does not show up anywhere else. And this great-granddaughter had contacted Jackson County Historical Society about 20 years ago. And at that time, she said she intended to write a book. She also wrote, "I suspect Easter may have been pregnant at the time of the murder with Lemuel, or he was very newborn." So she said, "I wonder if he died as a result of the murder somehow." And then she said Nancy was born earlier the same year. Easter's son, Aminadab, did have a son, Lemuel, who was born in 1859, and so that might be where the confusion is. She's off a generation. And the book that was previously mentioned, The Profitable Wife, that was written by a different descendant of Easter. So I don't know if this 4th great-granddaughter ever wrote a book. I haven't come across it if she did. Another quote from The Profitable Wife. Ira Green wanted to marry Easter. He was not in good health and contemplating the end of his days, but he was very persuasive. "I don't expect much, Easter. You can have your own room. Spend your money however you want. You will be Mrs. Ira Green. My name will protect you from gossip and bring you some peace of mind. You are the best cook in Otter Creek Township. A few home-cooked meals a week and living amongst family again is more than I could ask for in my remaining days." Ira had such an engaging, sweet smile. He reminded her of Thomas Wallace in her early years. Ira only wanted to make her happy. He had brought her across the river to Galena, because remember we talked about the boys needed money to run the farm, and where was she? And she just was really across the river as well, where nobody knew her or her personal business. Since the trial, most folks in Otter Creek Township generally regarded her with distrust. Dark looks and whispers followed her everywhere, even into church. For now, the river and waterways stood as a moat between her and all the pain still waiting for her back in Otter Creek. She closed her eyes and revisited the day the foreman stood up and announced the verdict. Every jury member found her not guilty, and the verdict was returned in less than an hour. With her acquittal, the indictments against Aminadab and Elijah were dropped, but the victory felt hollow. They held an awkward celebration dinner with her attorney, her father, and her sister before they headed back east. For a moment, she pondered the question Elijah had finally dared to ask her days before the acquittal. In private, and again, remember, this is historical fiction that I'm reading, so not a direct quote, but this is probably what happened. And so in private, when they were alone on the farm, with a tortured look in his face, so the son that helped hold down his father is looking at his mother, and he implored quietly, "Ma, when Aminadab and I had Pa pinned on the floor, why didn't you just run around the house with the knife? Why did you stick Pa in the throat?" I mean, for several moments, all she could do was just gape at him. Finally, she responded, "Elijah, he roared like a crazed bear that he was going to kill us all. I was just trying to stop him. I was afraid for you and Aminadab. I was afraid of what he would do next. It was pure survival. I wish it had been different." As he looked into her eyes with sorrow, she could sense he wanted more, but she had nothing left to say. "That's all I can tell you." Elijah nodded, eyes cast downward before hugging her and walking away. A small part of Easter couldn't help but wonder if the thought of Will squandering their hard-earned money on Dorothy, a widow, for months upon months, and his abusive behavior at her protests had caused her to strike harder and considerably deeper. But now a sickness in her soul followed her everywhere she went. There was no shaking it. If only she could turn back and somehow erase all the craziness that had transpired between her and Will during those last couple of years. Even now she missed the way he would tilt his head from side to side, shooting her that flirty grin of his that had won her heart so long ago. Crazy enough for a moment, it was still comforting to make excuses and pretend it was all a misunderstanding. She closed her eyes, breathed in deeply, and willed it to be sold. There it was. The pain subsided. In her heart, Easter knew the truth, would return in full force to knock her back down. But for now, she could just indulge in those thoughts, feel Will's invisible arms hold her like he did back when their marriage was young, and just remember the love. At last, she whispered softly to her audience of wildflowers, gently flowing waters, and the sun setting over the golden Galena hills, "I forgive you." Esther's second husband, Ira Green, died in Delaware County a year after their marriage. And this is his estate: 1 cow, $11, 2 calves, $2.50, 8 hogs, $36, 8 ducks, $1.20, 1 barrel, 30 cents, and 5 turkeys for $2.50. Also corn, seed, corn, wheat, hay fork, axes, auger, plow, etc. for a total of $130. Also personal property including 2 feather beds, 27 yards of rag carpet, 30-hour brass clock, old cooking stove, and 15 joints of stovepipe. That just killed me. That stovepipe being, what she inherited. The wash tub and a washboard. Easter married a third time in 1858 to William Gideon of Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. This was his third marriage also. He and his first wife had 7 children. Easter and William Gideon were married for 17 years. William was a veteran of the War of 1812, and he was 15 years older than Easter. So he would have been more her parents' age. Oh, and there was a letter. Did I miss it? Oh, there we go. So this is the last slide. And this kind of, tells you a little bit more about the family as well, but this letter written to William Conklin. Esther was Esther Easter was very ill. Her son Moses wrote to William, his brother, that she had been ill for about 2 weeks, and that he and their good neighbors were taking turns staying up with her, and that Mom wished that he and Mariah, William's wife, were there to see her. Easter did recover, and as soon as her health permitted, she sent a letter to her son Bill, as recorded by Moses. Stockville, Frontier County, Nebraska, December 1st, 1888. Dear son and daughter, it is with pleasure I seat myself to pen you a few lines to let you know I am quite sick, but a little better than I was when Moses wrote to you. But I still hold my bed yet this 22 days that I have been in bed now. But I know I will get better again. Well, Bill, I must tell you that Mary sent me $50 from California to come out there when and if I get better. I think I will go out there for my health. And if I get better, we'll return in the spring again. You and Mariah had better come out and see me. Yours truly, your mother, Easter Gideon, right soon. By June 1885, Easter arrived in Frontier County, Nebraska, less than 90 miles east of Colorado, settling. And so that was actually before. I was telling you about 1888, but this was before. And so she was with her daughter, Nancy, and family. And also in 1887, she purchased 40 acres of land from the U.S. government in Nebraska. And this was 3 years before her death. And this is something that one of her grandsons had said about her. Said that Esther, this is later in her life, kept most of her belongings in a knapsack, and she dressed like a beggar woman. She could be seen going down the road to visit one of her many children. And then it says she is believed to have died in or near Stockville, Nebraska, where some of her children lived. And so, you know, my take on this murder, you know, when I first read about it, it's like, oh, you know, I kind of thought, you know, she killed him. And then after learning more about what she went through, and then the closeness between her and her children, and, you know, she probably was justified, you know, in maybe doing this, especially like if she was pregnant or she had a baby, I don't know. And the fact that she had 2 more men that, you know, wanted to marry her, they must have certainly thought she was innocent. Does anybody have anything to add that knows about this family? Because like I said, I know there's a lot of family descendants still in this area. Raise your hand if you had heard about this murder before. Okay, so this was all Mary.
So I did check our murder case at the other building to see if we had anything about this particular murder, because I thought we did.
Yeah.
We did not.
And I had ordered that book, The Profitable Wife. It just never got delivered somehow. I was going to, you know, donate that to the museum. But yeah, so if you get a chance to read that book, and it's like a couple dollars if you want to do it on Kindle, but it's kind of an interesting book. And puts a perspective on this. Thank you.